The cold, conditioned air of the United States Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit was a familiar stage for the nation's most consequential legal dramas. It was a room designed for gravity, its walls paneled in dark, solemn wood that had absorbed the echoes of a century of arguments over power, liberty, and the intricate machinery of the Republic. Sunlight, heavily filtered through the tall, arched windows, fell in muted shafts across the green marble, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny, silent spectators in the still atmosphere. The gallery was packed, a quiet and orderly sea of dark suits, legal pads, and anxious faces. Reporters scribbled furiously into notebooks, their pens scratching a frantic rhythm against the profound silence of the chamber. Every major news network had a camera trained on the empty lecterns, their red recording lights like patient, unblinking eyes. At the center of it all was the raised bench, a formidable altar of justice where 9 judges, robed in black, would soon sit to hear a case that had captured the nation's attention. At the appellant's table to the left sat David Roberts. He was a man who looked as though he had been sculpted from the very marble of the courthouse. Tall, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a high forehead, he possessed a patrician confidence that radiated from him like a low-frequency hum. His suit was impeccably tailored, his posture ramrod straight. For weeks, Roberts had been the face of the argument for a broad, almost boundless interpretation of executive authority. His television appearances were masterclasses in controlled, compelling rhetoric, his op-eds models of persuasive logic. He argued, with the cool conviction of a seasoned academic, that for the executive branch to function effectively, its highest officials required a shield of immunity for actions taken within the vast, undefined outer perimeter of their official duties. Without it, he contended, every future decision-maker would be paralyzed by the threat of partisan legal challenges, grinding the gears of government to a halt. His argument was elegant, intellectually robust, and deeply unsettling to his opponents. He was not just a lawyer, he was an ideologue, and today was the apex of his crusade. He adjusted his tie, a subtle, practiced movement, and exchanged a confident murmur with his junior associate, a young man whose nervous energy was a stark contrast to his superior's unnerving calm. At the appellee's table to the right sat Pam Bondi, where Roberts was an exhibition of grand, sweeping confidence. Bondi was a study in focused, contained energy. She was dressed in a simple, dark blue suit, her blonde hair pulled back neatly. She was not a firebrand. She did not command the television screen with soaring rhetoric or thunderous indignation. Her power was of a different kind. It was quiet, meticulous, and rooted in an encyclopedic knowledge of precedent and a profound respect for the foundational principles of the law. She had served as a state's attorney general, a role that had trained her to build cases brick by brick, to find the single, overlooked fact that could bring a towering facade of falsehood crashing down. Her team, seated beside her, mirrored her demeanor, prepared, understated, and watchful. Ben Carter, her lead associate, a sharp lawyer in his early 30s, kept his eyes fixed on Roberts, trying to read the man's strategy. He had spent the last 3 weeks with Bondi, wargaming every possible argument, every potential question from the bench. He had watched her work, often late into the night, not with frantic energy, but with the steady, patient deliberation of a watchmaker. She wasn't preparing for a fight. She was preparing to reveal a truth she believed was already self-evident. She made a small, precise note on the legal pad in front of her, the gesture economical and purposeful. She didn't look at Roberts. She didn't need to. She had read every word he had ever written on the subject, watched every interview, and she understood the architecture of his argument better than he perhaps understood it himself. The sharp rap of the gavel cut through the expectant. "Hush! All rise," the clerk's voice intoned, a sound that seemed to physically lift the room to its feet. The 9 judges of the D.C. Circuit filed in from a side door and took their seats. In the center was Chief Judge Marcus Thorne, a man whose weary, intelligent face spoke of decades spent untangling the nation's most complex legal knots. He was known for his Socratic method, his tendency to follow a line of reasoning to its most distant, and sometimes absurd logical conclusion. To his right and left, the other judges settled in, a diverse panel of judicial philosophies and temperaments. There was Judge Eleanor Vance, a sharp, pragmatic jurist who often focused on the real-world implications of a ruling, and Judge Samuel Alito, an originalist who rarely spoke but whose questions, when they came, were like carefully aimed arrows. Chief Judge Thorne adjusted his spectacles and looked down at the two tables. "Good morning, counsel. We are here today to hear arguments in case number 23 to 145, the People versus Adams. Mr. Roberts, you may begin when you are ready." David Roberts rose and walked to the lectern with the fluid grace of a man entirely at home in the spotlight. He placed his hands lightly on its edges, surveyed the bench for a moment, and began. His voice was a rich, resonant baritone, filling the cavernous room without any hint of strain. "Mr. Chief Judge, and may it please the court," he started, the traditional opening delivered with the warmth of a personal greeting. "The question before this court today is not merely about the actions of one individual. It is about the very nature of the executive office in a world of profound challenges and relentless political opposition. It is about the ability of any president, now and in the future, to govern effectively, to make decisions that are difficult, unpopular, but necessary for the security and prosperity of our nation." He spoke for nearly 20 minutes without interruption, laying out his case with architectural precision. He cited historical precedents, from the early days of the Republic to the modern era, framing them all as part of a long, unbroken tradition of recognizing a sphere of executive action that must remain beyond the reach of ordinary legal process. He argued that the outer perimeter of official duties was a necessarily broad concept, for the duties of a modern executive were themselves boundless and impossible to fully catalog. To subject a former official to prosecution for acts they undertook while in office, he argued, was to invite a chilling effect of catastrophic proportions. "Imagine," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate, conversational tone, "a president facing a grave national security crisis. A decision must be made in minutes, not days. The information is partial, the consequences of inaction dire. In that moment, should that president be forced to consult a team of lawyers to weigh the possibility that a future, politically hostile prosecutor might recharacterize that life-or-death decision as a criminal act? The answer, respected judges, must be no. The presidency cannot function as a legal partnership. It must function as a command." Judge Vance leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "Mr. Roberts, your argument seems to paint a picture of a president standing entirely outside the legal framework that governs every other citizen. Where in the Constitution do you find the basis for such a sweeping grant of immunity? The text seems to suggest the opposite, that no person is above the law." Roberts smiled, a confident, scholarly smile. He was prepared for this. "Your Honor, the basis is not found in a single clause, but in the very structure of the Constitution itself. The document creates a tripartite system of government with a separation of powers. That separation is not merely a suggestion, it is a mandate for the judiciary to sit in judgment of the core official acts of the executive. Is a violation of that separation, it would subordinate one co-equal branch to another. The immunity we speak of is not personal, it is functional. It protects the office, not the individual, ensuring its continued, unimpeded operation as the framers intended." Chief Judge Thorne pushed his glasses up his nose. "Let us explore that. Mr. Roberts, you used the phrase core official acts. Who decides what falls within that category? Is it the executive himself? If so, what is to stop an official from simply declaring any act, no matter how questionable, official, and thereby shielding it from review? A fair question, Mr. Chief Judge." Roberts responded smoothly. "The initial determination must, by necessity, lie with the executive. However, it is a determination made within a political, not a legal, context. The checks on executive overreach are found in the other branches, in Congress's power of impeachment, in its control of the purse, and ultimately, in the judgment of the American people at the ballot box. These are the constitutional remedies. For political disputes, the courtroom is the remedy for private wrongs, not for the official conduct of the nation's chief executive." Across the room, Pam Bondi listened, her face a mask of neutrality. Ben Carter, sitting beside her, felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. Roberts was good. He was incredibly good. He was weaving a narrative that was both compelling and, on its surface, legally coherent. He was framing the issue not as one of accountability, but of governmental function and constitutional structure. He was making Bondi's position seem like a naive, unworkable alternative. Ben scribbled a note and slid it to Bondi. He's making it all about structure, avoiding specifics. Bondi glanced at the note, gave a barely perceptible nod, and turned, her attention back to Roberts, her gaze steady and unnervingly calm. She was not listening to his words so much as she was listening to the space between them, to the assumptions that held his grand theory together. For another half hour, Roberts masterfully parried the judge's questions. He was a fencer, deflecting every thrust with an elegant riposte, always returning to his central theme, functional necessity. He conceded that a president could be prosecuted for private acts clearly outside their official role, but the official acts themselves, the very business of governing, had to be sacrosanct. By the time he concluded his opening argument, the momentum in the room was palpable. He had built a fortress to rule otherwise. He finished, his voice resonating with sincerity, is to risk fundamentally altering the balance of power that has served this nation for over 2 centuries. It is to invite political chaos and to weaken the very office that is meant to be the steady hand in times of crisis. Thank you. He gave a slight bow to the bench and returned to his seat, a subtle air of triumph about him. His junior associate looked at him with undisguised admiration. The courtroom buzzed with a low murmur. Reporters were already typing furiously on their phones, sending out alerts. Roberts delivers powerful defense of executive authority. Judges press Roberts on limits of power, but he holds firm. On a cable news network, a legal analyst was saying, David Roberts is at the absolute top of his game today. He has framed this in a way that is very difficult for the other side to dismantle, without appearing to advocate for a weaker, less effective form of government. Pam Bondi has an incredibly steep hill to climb. Chief Judge Thorne looked over at the other table. Ms. Bondi. Pam Bondi rose and walked to the lectern. She did not project the same immediate, room-filling charisma as Roberts. Her presence was quieter, more grounded. She arranged a single sheet of paper in front of her. Though she never once looked at it, she took a moment, her eyes sweeping across the 9 faces on the bench, making contact with each of them. When she spoke, her voice was clear and measured, devoid of rhetorical flourish. Mr. Chief Judge, and may it please the court, she began, my learned colleague, Mr. Roberts, has presented a compelling and eloquent theory of executive power. It is a theory that prioritizes function above all else, a theory that, in its pursuit of an efficient government, is willing to sacrifice a foundational principle of our republic, that we are a nation of laws, not of men. She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Mr. Roberts has built his argument on the idea of a functional immunity necessary for the president to do his job. But the Constitution already provides the only immunity it deems necessary, the impeachment clause. It offers a specific process for holding a president accountable for high crimes and misdemeanors. It does not, anywhere in its text, suggest that once an official leaves office, the courthouse doors are forever barred to inquiries about their official conduct. On the contrary, the entire structure of our legal system is built on the opposite premise. Instead of attacking Roberts's fortress head-on, she began to lay a new foundation next to it. She spoke about the history of the rule of law, tracing it back through English common law to the Magna Carta. She spoke not of abstract structures, but of individual rights and the role of the courts in protecting citizens from the overreach of power. Her argument was less a grand theory and more a patient recitation of first principles. Mr. Roberts fears a chilling effect on executive decision-making, she continued. But I ask the court to consider the chilling effect of his proposed doctrine, a doctrine that would tell every future president that as long as they can plausibly label an action official, they can operate with impunity, knowing that the only check is a political one, which, in a hyper-partisan era, is often no check at all. What message does that send? It tells them that the law is a tool for the governed, but not for the governors. That is not the system the framers designed. They feared unchecked power far more than they feared inefficient government. Judge Alito, who had been silent throughout Roberts's presentation, leaned toward his microphone. Ms. Bondi, are you suggesting that there is no distinction at all between a president's official and private acts, for example, a decision to order a military strike? Is it your position that a president could be hauled into court by a disgruntled citizen and forced to defend that decision against a claim of, say, assault? Bondi met his gaze without flinching. Thank you, Your Honor. No, that is not my position. My position is that the legal system already has well-established mechanisms for handling such questions. Doctrines like the political question doctrine, considerations of state secrets, and the specific intent requirements of criminal statutes all serve to protect the legitimate exercise of executive power from frivolous or inappropriate litigation. We do not need to invent a new, absolute immunity to solve a problem that the law has already solved. The existing framework is nuanced and robust. Mr. Roberts's proposal, in contrast, is a blunt instrument. It does not distinguish between a good faith national security decision and a corrupt act done for personal gain. So long as both can be squeezed under the broad umbrella of official duties. She was turning the tables. She was portraying Roberts's argument not as sophisticated, but as clumsy and absolutist. She was the one advocating for nuance, for trusting the existing, carefully balanced legal system. Ben Carter felt the knot in his stomach begin to loosen. He could see her strategy now. She wasn't trying to demolish Roberts's fortress. She was simply showing the court that it was built on sand. The questioning from the bench continued. Bondi answered each one with the same calm, steady precision. She rarely raised her voice. Her power came from the relentless, patient application of logic and precedent. When Judge Vance asked about the risk of politically motivated prosecutions, Bondi had a ready answer. Your Honor, the risk of politically motivated prosecution exists for every citizen. That is why we have grand juries, stringent evidentiary standards, and the requirement of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We trust these safeguards to protect the innocent and punish the guilty. Every single day, the argument that these fundamental protections are suddenly insufficient for one category of person, a former public official, is an argument for a special class of citizen, a concept that is antithetical to the principle of equal justice under law. When her allotted time was nearly up, she concluded not with a soaring crescendo, but with a quiet, powerful summary. Mr. Roberts asks you to protect the office. I ask you to protect the rule of law. He asks you to imagine a future president paralyzed by fear. I ask you to imagine a future president emboldened by impunity. The framers made their choice. They chose accountability. This court should affirm that choice. Thank you. She returned to her table. The room was quieter now, more contemplative. The confident buzz that had followed Roberts's speech was gone, replaced by a sense of intellectual equilibrium. The legal analyst on the news network had changed his tune. Pam Bondi has done something remarkable here, he said. His voice tinged with surprise. She has reframed the entire debate. Instead of getting bogged down in the minutiae of executive power, she's brought it back to the bedrock principle of the rule of law. This is now a genuine contest of judicial philosophies. Chief Judge Thorne looked at the clock. Mr. Roberts, you have 5 minutes for rebuttal. David Roberts stood and walked back to the lectern. The effortless confidence he had displayed earlier was still there, but it seemed more practiced now, less innate. He knew the ground had shifted. He had to reclaim it. Thank you, Mr. Chief Judge, he began, attempting to recapture his earlier warmth. Ms. Bondi speaks eloquently of the rule of law, and of course, we all believe in the rule of law. But the rule of law is not a suicide pact. It cannot be applied so rigidly that it prevents the government from functioning in the real world. Ms. Bondi's vision, while idealistic, is untethered from the practical realities of modern governance. Her trust in existing legal mechanisms is, I'm afraid, misplaced. The pressures of modern politics are too great, the tools of legal warfare too sophisticated, to expose a former president to the full panoply of legal challenges for their official axes to hand their political opponents a weapon of immense and dangerous power. He tried to rebuild his fortress, to reinforce its walls. He reiterated his points about the separation of powers, about the chilling effect, about the need for decisive action. But something had changed. His arguments, which had seemed so powerful an hour ago, now sounded defensive. He was no longer on the attack. He was trying to patch holes that Bondi had patiently, methodically revealed. The judges listened, their faces impassive. Chief Judge Thorne glanced at the clock. Roberts had about a minute left. He seemed to sense it, and he decided to go for a strong, definitive closing statement. Ultimately, Roberts declared, his voice rising slightly, "The position advocated by my colleague is one that would enfeeble the presidency. It would turn the president from a commander-in-chief into a chief litigant. It substitutes the judgment of unelected judges and partisan prosecutors for the constitutional checks of impeachment and elections. The framers created a powerful executive for a reason, and this court should not dismantle that creation based on a theoretical risk that ignores the greater risk of a paralyzed government. The protection we seek is not for a person, but for the effective functioning of our constitutional republic." He was about to say thank you and sit down, having ended on what he felt was a strong, principled note. It was in that fractional pause, that moment of intended finality, that Pam Bondi rose from her chair. It was an unusual move during a rebuttal, but not forbidden. "Mr. Chief Judge," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the air. "I ask the court's indulgence for a single, final question to Mr. Roberts." A murmur went through the gallery. All eyes snapped to Bondi, then to the Chief Judge. Thorne looked from Bondi to Roberts, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. This was not standard procedure, but the case was of singular importance. He nodded slowly. "The court will allow it. A single question, Ms. Bondi." Then he looked at Roberts. "Mr. Roberts, you are not obligated to answer, but the court would be interested in your response." Roberts, caught slightly off guard, gave a magnanimous, almost condescending nod. What could she possibly ask that would undo his entire argument? He felt secure. He gestured for her to proceed, a small, confident flick of the hand. Pam Bondi did not approach the lectern. She stood by her table, a picture of absolute stillness. She looked directly at David Roberts, her gaze piercing and direct. The entire courtroom leaned in. The silence was absolute, a heavy, expectant void. The pens of the reporters were poised over their notepads. The cameras were zoomed in tight, one on Bondi, one on Roberts. Ben Carter held his breath. He had no idea what was coming. This was not in their plan. This was pure instinct, born of a lifetime in the courtroom. Bondi's voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it carried an astonishing weight. It was simple, direct, and stripped of all legal jargon. It was a question aimed not at the legal scholar, but at the man. "Mr. Roberts," she began, her tone respectful yet unyielding, "you have argued eloquently for a functional immunity based on the executive's own determination of what constitutes an official act. You have agreed, in your colloquy with this court, that our system is founded on the principle that no individual is above the law and that all governmental power is constrained by the Constitution." She paused, letting her own summary of his position settle in the air. Roberts nodded slightly, a confirmation. He was still confident, waiting for the trap, sure he could sidestep it. Then came the question. It was quiet, simple, and devastating. "Mr. Roberts, if we accept your premise that an executive's own determination of what constitutes an official act is the sole basis for immunity, does the Constitution then place any meaningful limit on that power, or does the limit simply become whatever the holder of the office declares it to be?" The world seemed to stop. The question hung in the air, perfect and lethal. It was a masterstroke of legal jiu-jitsu. She had used Roberts's own arguments, his own concessions, to forge the weapon of his undoing. It was a binary choice, a logical fork in the road from which there was no escape. David Roberts froze. The confident smile vanished from his face. His eyes, for the first time that day, lost their focus. He stared at Bondi, but his mind was racing, frantically searching for a third path, a way out of the trap she had laid. There was none. If he answered, yes, the Constitution still places a limit, he would be immediately forced to concede that the executive's own determination could not be the standard because an external limit the Constitution as interpreted by the courts would have to take precedence. In saying yes, he would invalidate his entire argument. His fortress would crumble, its foundation turning to dust. If he answered, no, the limit is whatever the holder declares it to be, he would be openly advocating for a monarchy. He would be stating, in front of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, that a president's power is absolute and self-defining. It was a position so radical, so fundamentally alien to the American legal and political tradition, that it was unsayable. It was professional suicide. He stood at the lectern, speechless. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2, 5. The courtroom, which had been so full of sound and argument, was now a vacuum. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. The dust motes dancing in the sunbeams seemed to have frozen in place. The power dynamic in the room did not just shift, it inverted with the force of a tectonic event. David Roberts, the master of the room, the eloquent and unshakable advocate, was suddenly small. He seemed to shrink before their eyes, his bespoke suit suddenly looking a size too big. His hands, which had rested so confidently on the lectern, now gripped it, his knuckles white. His mouth opened slightly, as if to form a word, but no sound came out. Pam Bondi did not press him. She did not need to. She held the silence, her expression unchanged. It was not a look of triumph or vindication. It was a look of patient expectation, of someone who had asked a simple question and was now simply waiting for an equally simple answer. Her confidence was absolute, a quiet, immovable object that had just met Roberts' supposedly unstoppable force and broken it. She had known, with chilling certainty, that he had no answer. Her entire strategy had been to walk him to this exact point, this precipice of logic, and let him look down. On the bench, the judge's reactions were a study in judicial restraint, but they were profound nonetheless. Chief Judge Thorne, who had been leaning back in his chair, slowly sat forward. His pen, which had been scribbling notes all morning, lay still on his desk. His gaze was fixed on Roberts, and his expression was one of intense, analytical fascination. He was watching a brilliant argument be dismantled in real time by a single, perfectly crafted question. Judge Vance's lips were pressed into a thin, tight line. She exchanged a quick, knowing glance with the judge beside her. Even Judge Alito, the stoic originalist, had a flicker of something surprise, respect, in his eyes. They all understood. They saw the inescapable logic of the trap. Roberts attempted no further defense. There was none to make. Any word he spoke would dig him deeper into the hole. To try to equivocate, to hedge, to re-explain his position would be to acknowledge the mortal wound Bondi's question had inflicted. Silence was his only option, but it was a damning, deafening silence. It was a concession. It was a surrender. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably no more than 15 seconds, Roberts subtly shook his head, a barely perceptible gesture of defeat. He cleared his throat, but it was a dry, rasping sound. He looked at the Chief Judge, his eyes pleading for an exit. Chief Judge Thorne recognized the moment for what it was. The argument was over. He broke the spell, his voice gentle but firm. "Thank you, Mr. Roberts. We have your arguments. The court will take the matter under advisement." He turned to Bondi. "Thank you, Ms. Bondi." With a final, sharp rap of the gavel, he concluded the session. "This court is adjourned." As the judges filed out, the courtroom remained in a state of suspended animation for a moment longer, quietly absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. The collective exhale was almost audible. Then, the room erupted, not in loud cheers or shouts, but in a frantic, explosive burst of activity. Reporters were on their feet, rushing for the exits, their phones already to their ears, dictating the stunning conclusion. "It's over," one of them said breathlessly into her phone. "Bondi just ended it. One question. You have to see the tape, David." Roberts stood frozen at the lectern for another moment before his junior associate. His face pale with shock, touched his arm. Roberts seemed to come back to himself. He gathered his papers with unsteady hands, his earlier grace completely gone. He did not look at Bondi's table as he and his team made their hasty, defeated exit from the courtroom. Pam Bondi, in contrast, showed no emotion. She calmly gathered her notes, stacking them into a neat pile. Ben Carter looked at her, his eyes wide with awe. "Pam," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. I've never seen anything like it." Bondi gave him a small, tired smile. "The truth is a powerful thing, Ben," she said quietly. "You just have to clear away the noise, so people can hear it." She turned and, with her team in tow, walked calmly out of the courtroom, moving through the throng of reporters with a quiet dignity, offering only a polite "no comment for now, thank you." Within the hour, it was the biggest news story in the country. The phrase "Bondi's final question" was the #1 trending topic on every social media platform. News networks scrapped their scheduled programming to go live with breaking coverage. They played the clip of the exchange over and over, Bondi's calm, steady voice, the simple, devastating question, Roberts' prolonged, stunned silence, the visible shift on the faces of the judges. On one major network, a panel of the nation's top legal analysts was assembled, their faces a mixture of astonishment and professional admiration. "I have been covering the courts for 30 years, said a veteran Supreme Court reporter, "and I have never, ever seen an oral argument collapse so completely, so instantaneously. It was like watching a controlled demolition." Another analyst, a professor from a prestigious law school, broke down the genius of the question itself. "Look at the structure of what she did," he explained, pointing to a whiteboard where he had written out the question. "She didn't attack his evidence. She didn't attack his character. She attacked the logical necessity of his conclusion. She forced him to confront the ultimate implication of his own argument, an implication he could not defend. It's a classic Socratic maneuver, but executed with a level of precision and timing that is just breathtaking. This will be taught in law schools for generations. This is the new gold standard for how to win an argument, not by shouting louder, but by thinking more clearly." The viral quote was everywhere. It appeared in memes, on t-shirts, in newspaper headlines. Or does the limit simply become whatever the holder of the office declares it to be? The question resonated far beyond the legal community. It tapped into a deep public anxiety about the nature of power and accountability. It wasn't just a legal tactic. It was a profound civic question that every citizen could understand. It cut through the complexity and the jargon and went straight to the heart of the matter. In the days that followed, the discourse continued. Op-eds praised Bondi's finishing move as a defense of constitutional principles. Legal panels convened online to dissect every moment of the hearing. Even commentators who had been sympathetic to Roberts' position had to concede the intellectual power of Bondi's final gambit. They acknowledged that Roberts, in his quest for a theory of functional power, had neglected to account for its most dangerous logical endpoint. Weeks later, the D.C. Circuit issued its unanimous ruling. It was a thorough and resounding victory for Bondi's position. The opinion, written by Chief Judge Thorne, didn't even need to be overly complex. It quoted Bondi's final question directly in its analysis, noting that counsel for the appellant was unable to provide a satisfactory answer to this fundamental challenge. The court affirmed that while the presidency is a uniquely powerful office, it is not an island. Separate from the legal continent on which the republic rests, the existing legal frameworks, the court ruled, were sufficient to protect the office from frivolous litigation while ensuring that no one is entirely above the law. The news of the ruling reached Pam Bondi not in a crowded press conference, but in the quiet of her office late one evening. Ben Carter brought the document in, his face alight with victory. "We did it, Pam," he said, placing the ruling on her desk. Unanimous. They even quoted the question. Bondi picked up the document and read it, a deep sense of relief washing over her. It wasn't the thrill of victory or the satisfaction of having beaten a formidable opponent. It was a quieter, more profound feeling, the satisfaction of seeing a vital principle reaffirmed, of seeing the system, for all its flaws and complexities, work as it was intended. She had not sought to create a viral moment or to become a legal celebrity. She had simply sought to defend a cornerstone of the law, and in doing so, had given it a voice that echoed across the nation. She looked out the window at the city lights, the ceaseless flow of traffic, a reminder that the work of the nation continued, its gears turning, its debates raging. Her moment in the spotlight would fade, as all such moments do. The news cycle would move on. But she knew that the question she had asked would remain, a small but powerful testament to the idea that in a republic of laws, no argument for unchecked power can withstand the simple, clarifying force of a single, well-aimed question. She had not ended Roberts's argument with a shout, but with a silence that spoke louder than any oration, a silence that had allowed the fundamental principles of the law to finally and decisively speak for themselves. The case would likely be appealed. The fight would continue in other forms. But a critical battle had been won, not just for her client, but for the very idea of a government accountable to its people. And as she finally turned off her office light and headed home, she felt not the weight of victory, but the quiet, steady lightness of having done her job.